So I believe I've got the most high-tech dinghy out there in terms of data capture devices. This video is going to walk you through my setup, data being collected, the workflow to processing it, and what the output is for me to analyse my own sailing. This video should be useful to you whether you are a sailor just starting out wanting to know what's possible, or you're an Olympic sailor wanting to know about the latest devices. Let's see the setup. 3, 2, 1. So starting off at the front, this is a wind sensor. It's got little ultrasonic sensors which bounce sound between the top of the device and this little plate and measures the air passing through. It's got 4 of those sensors. It should be able to kind of tell direction, but it transmits to my Vakaros, which is down in the boat here, and you can see it's got true wind direction, true wind speed, maxes. To be honest, on the water I never look at any of this stuff. It's just a recording for after the time. The other kind of key bit of information I use is kilograms here. So that is my Cyclops load sensor on my main sheet. Now, for those of you not familiar with the Europe, basically upwind, you trim the angle of attack with the traveller in and out, and you basically do the sheet tension all with your main sheet rather than the kicker. And the kicker, which again is one of the changes I made I'll go into later, the kicker is something you really only use for reaching when you are outside of the range of the traveller. So that load sensor on the main sheet will give me a kind of a direct representation of my leech tension, which is a really critical feature going upwind. Now this gives me a number at the moment, what is it, 4 or 5 kilos. That number obviously is split over 3 lines going into the boom. That is roughly halfway down the boom, so you have to kind of times it by 3 and then divide it by 2 to get the actual tension on the leech. The actual number doesn't really matter, it's just about having something that replicates from day to day. As I just said, the wind data and the load data go into the Vakaros via Bluetooth. Now, it isn't just a data logging device, it is actually recording information itself as well. So in here there are accelerometers. In here there are accelerometers which will measure the pitch fore and aft and the heel or roll of the device. Additionally, it is recording your magnetic orientation of the device or your heading. It then also records on top of that GPS, and this can be used for speed over ground and course over ground. Now, the device itself has loads more functionality in terms of what you can do with that data, but for the purpose of this video, we're just really talking about the data capture in terms of the devices and the output in terms of analytics. If you'd like to see a full review of this device and its functionality, then drop a comment and I'll look at doing that in the future. Going to the back of the boat, this is my camera mount. I've not got a camera on there because it's on this stick, but that gives me a really good view down into the boat and what is going on. I think the first thing I'm doing over this winter, I've already said, is a little bit of sail development. I've got a camera which I mounted a fixed place on the boat. I also sometimes mount on a fixed place on the boom, recording on the GoPro in a linear format, so there's not the kind of frame warping shots of the sail, looking at these trim bands. Typically use 25 frames per second. Things don't really happen quick enough to needing a higher frame rate, although sometimes I will use one. Resolution, typically use 1440, so that's the 4:3. It uses the maximum sensor size but is a lower resolution and keeps the file sizes down, as does using the lower bitrate. I tend to use a flat color profile just so I don't crop out any kind of information at either end of the light range. This is all about just keeping the data package smaller, the workflow quicker, extending battery life, rather than creating a amazing looking image. That's not the goal here. I use the max lens mod on my stern cam. This keeps the horizon locked when the camera rolls around, which is really neat and just makes the footage a little bit more viewable. But for the rest of my stuff, I tend to use a stabilization free footage. I just mount it in a fixed location. And what that means is any movement in the shot is real life movement rather than the image being shifted around digitally to stabilize. Lastly, I always record with the GPS on. This isn't because I particularly use the GPS data for analysing my sailing, but what it is really good for is the software uses the GPS timecode to sync to the GPS log on the Vakaros file, which is where the data is all going into. Another thing I typically add is a DJI wireless mic. Now, I don't actually connect it to a camera, I just record it on the transmitter itself, and I attach a lav mic to it with a wind muff, and I just drop this in a waterproof pouch, put it in my buoyancy aid pocket, and then that gives me a really nice audio, and I can commentate on my sailing.
It's fresh. Oh, no idea this mic will still be working.
Once I'm back home, it's a matter of I just remove the SD cards, plug them into the SD card reader, plug the mic in, Vakaros, download the Vakaros file. I just drop that in a folder on my computer, label up the footage. The process then is a little bit involved. I'm going to walk you through what I do in terms of screen capture. For most of it, it's pretty simple, but for the wind data, there is a bit of fiddling around. And there's quite a lot of learning I've had since taking on that Calypso wind measurement device. So this is where I have got to. So I've got my data all uploaded to the computer, and the first thing I've got to do is upload that Njord. So I log into Njord, choose my boat. So these are all the various boats I sell, but 435, the Europe. Load, add files, upload the Vakaros file. It uploads. Now this is going to tell me that I've already uploaded this file, so I don't have to pay for it. So that's fine. Now there's a few steps to getting this data correct. So I'll just go through the process. I had a 4th of January, and this is the raw data. Now the first thing I do, I'm already in this calibration screen. You'll see on the right hand side and the various tabs, but this is loads of information here. But the first thing to do is to calibrate the data. It gives you two things that need to calibrate. First of all is the compass heading. So when you mount your compass on your boat, then it may not be completely aligned with the center line of your boat, which will give you a discrepancy between the heading and the course over ground. Obviously there'll be a discrepancy because of leeway, but it gives you additional discrepancy. So if I go to upwind, it kind of looks at it gives you a calibration. So it looks at both tacks, looks at the discrepancy between your course over ground and your heading, and gives you a value by which you can correct the compass heading. Now for me, this correction is always about 3.2 degrees, and that's because, you know, wherever I've glued this compass onto the bulkhead, and the bulkheads flare away, so there's obviously, and it's just with Velcro, so there's probably a 3-degree offset in this. So I go into the data and calculate metric, factor offset, and heading equals the existing heading times 1 minus 3.27. Apply that processing step. I go back into events, look at that upwind, and now it's saying to correct, add 0 degrees to the compass heading. So that's perfectly corrected. Second thing that you need to kind of calibrate is the wind sensor. Now the wind sensor has a little mark on the front, and this just transmits the Vakaros the wind speed and direction relative to this mark on the front of it. So the device itself doesn't know that in what orientation it is to the rest of the boat, so you have to orientate it correctly for that apparent wind data to be correct relative to the centre line of the boat. Now, if you were putting this on and mounting it permanently, you go to great lengths to align this centre point. In the Calypso app, there's also an offset you can apply to it as well to get that spot on. But as you can see, I am taking this off and remounting it each day. And if I mount it slightly different each time, then I'm going to be off by a few degrees. So this Njord Analytics tool gives me an opportunity to correct that. So it gives you two ways of doing it. That's by comparing the apparent wind angles on either tack, because either tack you should have similar apparent wind angles upwind. And it does that based on all the upwind readings, or it does it on a snapshot before and after tack. So it's suggesting an apparent wind calibration of 4.3 degrees. So go back to the data, calculate metric, apparent wind angle equals apparent wind angle times 1 plus 4.3 degrees. Apply processing steps in events, go to that second upwind, and again now it's saying the correction is 0 degrees. So that apparent wind angle is basically kind of realigned the data that's coming from this device, so it's now perfectly aligned with the centre of the boat. The compass data is also perfectly aligned with the centre line of the boat, so we're all in sync. So that's a really key thing that the Njord tool allows me to do that other data software doesn't. So now, since using this wind data, I've gone around the houses because there is additional problem. So I'll just bring up this tactical view, and what you'll see is where it is green, I am lifted on starboard, and where it is port, I'm lifted on port. Now, what you'll notice straight away is that I am very good at sailing, because I'm always sailing on a lift on starboard and a lift on port. When I'm on port, I'm lifted, the wind's gone left, and when I'm on starboard, the wind's gone right. You can see these little arrows showing where the wind direction and strength is coming from. Now, at first I thought, oh, this is, maybe I'm a tactical god. I'm not a tactical god. And then I started thinking, why would this data always be skewed from the Calypso? So it's showing a permanent lift. And it also shows in the true wind direction. So if you compare, if I filter the data, port, just look on this left-hand side, true wind direction is 131 degrees on port. And when I go to starboard, it's 144. So it's basically saying there's about 10-13 degrees difference between the average wind direction on either tack, which this was a really steady, breezy day, so that was just not true at all. So something is wrong in the data. Now, the Calypso only records the apparent wind as it comes into the device. This is a systemic error in that it's off by one direction when I'm sailing on one tack, and it's off in the other direction on another tack. And otherwise, the wind speed data seems to correlate pretty well out of here. I started thinking, what else could cause this? I could think, well, I'm sailing with a bit of heel. Maybe when this device heels over, the wind flow through it is being deflected round. And then when I heel back the other way, it's deflected and gives a lift on that angle. But I actually spoke to someone who used one of these with a Moth at the club, and they sail with quite a significant amount of windward heel. And he said he was still getting the same kind of always lifted no matter what attack kind of result from this. The conclusion I've come from is where I'm mounting my device is actually in the upwind wake effect of my sail. And what that means is the wind is being pre-bent as it goes into my sail, pre-bent by 5 degrees to give me a lift. And that seems to be what the correction needs to be. Now, I could mount in this device on the top of the mast, but my mast rotates with the boom, so the orientation of the device would be completely changing all the time. So I kind of needed to mount it off the deck. I could get a longer pole to mount it further away from the sail. I think that would reduce this consistent error, but I don't think I'd ever be able to completely eliminate it. So instead, I've quantified it. I've had a look through the data, and what it seems to run all the calculations on the apparent wind angle, the sensitivities, the apparent wind speed, all these kind of things. And what I've come to conclusion is there seems to be a 5-degree exaggeration of the apparent wind angle, which then goes into the true wind angle and the true wind direction, and is telling me that I'm always lifted. Now, one of the really powerful things, as we've just seen with this analytics tool, is you can do the corrections. So I can go calculate metric, and so apparent wind angle is -5 times the sine of apparent wind angle. So that means no matter whether it's your apparent wind angle is -30 or +30, when it applies this formula, the apparent wind angle will go to -25 and +25. So it's kind of the value is subtracted rather than the absolute number. Got a formula from Njord which also links that apparent wind correction to my load cell on the boat. So I can also link this correction to when I'm sheeting on the sails actually working, which is really powerful. Just for the base of this demonstration, I'm not doing that, but that is an additional kind of step. I now go into the events, apparent wind angle is corrected, but you'll see I'm still showing as lifted on one tack and lifted on the other. So what we now need to do is cascade that calculation, that recalculation of the apparent wind angle through into the true wind angle, true wind speed, true wind direction, and the VMGs to get all those numbers which fall out of this apparent wind speed correct. So I've got to go back into data, calculate a few more metrics, and they have these standard calculations actually built in. So true wind angle, so you've got this little formula, true wind angle is apparent wind angle, apparent wind speed, and now at this point you can do an additional correction for leeway. I'm not, because I just want a rough number, but if you're being really nitty gritty you can do a correction for leeway as well. I'm not. I also need to correct true wind speed, so wind angle, apparent wind speed and speed over ground, and then I need to get the true wind direction, so heading, because true plus true wind angle, because true wind angle is defined relative to the center line of your boat, so it's relative to heading. So that gives me a true wind direction. Then finally I'm going to recalculate my VMG, so cos true wind angle times speed over ground. So now looking at the true wind direction, so I'm going to go port true wind direction is 139 and starboard true wind direction is 140.3, so there's only 0.4 of a degree difference between the average true wind direction either tacks. That tells me it's not being, there's no correlation between what tack I'm on and true wind direction, which is true because it wasn't a very shifty day. I wasn't tacking on the shifts at all. The apparent wind angles for port is 32 degrees, for starboard about 32 degrees, so we've got symmetry there. One last comment about the what you could do in terms of calibration is this device is measuring the wind speed at about 1.2 meters above deck, 1.5 meters above water level. So the true wind speed I get out of this is always a little bit less than what your mind might think it is. And that's because our heads are kind of calibrated to the meteorological reporting of wind speed, which is referenced to 10 meters above the surface. Now, the wind speed increases above the surface due to surface friction slowing down the wind low down. My device is relatively low, so the wind speed is slowed down there. So when you go out sailing, you see a forecast for 10 knots, you go sailing, you won't be experiencing a full 10 knots because you'll be lower than 10 meters, but your head thinks this is what 10 knots is. I may recalibrate. There's a formula you can use to recalibrate up from kind of 1.5 meters to 10 meters. Like, say for 15 knots measured on this device, true wind speed, it would be more like 18 knots true wind speed up at 10 meters. I don't know, is it of relevance? Well, I could just retrain my head to what, you know, the wind speed feels like at 1.5 meters above the surface. However, when you're talking to other people and I'm sharing this data with my sail designer, he's got his own idea of wind strengths, and that'll be calibrated to the 10 knot reported wind speed as well. So I might in future start doing a little calibration on the true wind speed after I've done all these corrections to give it as kind of the meteorological 10 meter above the surface wind speed, just so when we're talking wind strengths, because he's probably watching me sail around in what looks like 14 knots, or what is reported as 14 knots, saying, oh, that doesn't look very windy, but he's very overpowered. But actually, it's more like 17, 18 knots as you would know it. So now all the data is kind of aligned. The next thing is to bring this into Njord Player. So this syncs it up with the file. So I click down here in the left, Njord Player, open in Njord Player, and it gives you a file, and this syncs up the data. But this is where recording with GPS is really important, because you'll see for all these files it uses the GPS time from the GoPro to sync it. If you don't have that, GoPro's own time code is absolutely terrible. It wanders all over the place, and it's different for each of the clips as you get to, so that's a bit of a nightmare. Doing a bit of a tuning run with John Reese below there, and if I click I can look at the sail data, and then you can send screenshots of these sail profiles to your sailmaker. I've got all the load cell information, so leech loads for it, all the kind of apparent wind headings, all this kind of stuff is all in there. So that is the work process to kind of get my data working for me. It's quite involved, but in the future videos you'll see how useful it is or isn't, and some of the quirks of this data for actually making gains in your own sailing. So hopefully this video has been really informative about what is possible in terms of data capture, a little bit about what we get out of it. So I have some future episodes actually going through the things I'm testing on this boat, the adaptations I'm making, backed up with this analytical approach. Hopefully it should be really enlightening for you. And yeah, stick around because those videos will be coming soon.